and let me bring in our keynote speaker, Erica Monteith, who's the SVP of Paid Media at GMMB. Erica? Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Good to have you. Now, are you coming to us from one of the swing states, or are you coming to us from the home office in DC?
Coming to you from the home office in DC.
Okay. So Erica has been previously to GMMB. She was at Oracle and at Merkle. GMMB, if you're not familiar, is the largest Democratic consulting firm, has been deeply involved in almost all of the major national campaigns over the last several cycles. But also the company works on behalf of many trade and advocacy organizations. Erica, let me ask you, first of all, what is the state of media opportunities for political campaigns now in this cycle compared to the 2016 and 2018 cycle? What's changed substantially for you as a media buyer and planner?
Yeah, so I think what we've really seen over the last 2 to 4 years is just the overall scale of CTV and premium video, and more of those full episode players, forced view video, just really video in general. There were options back in 2016 and in 2018, but the sheer amount of them is not what we're seeing in 2020. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of really great options out there to target across a lot of different platforms and a lot of different mediums that we didn't have access to because the scale just wasn't there in 2016.
How is now we've heard a great deal about, of course, threats of regulation, many of which never happened, but we have heard about a lot of policy changes among a lot of these major platforms. How is that impacting you in terms of what you're able to do now versus maybe just 2 or 4 years ago?
Yeah, so a lot has changed, especially with some of the bigger players. Twitter, as hopefully most of you know, we're not allowed to do any political advertising on whatsoever. So on Twitter, especially with candidates, we really encourage them to have a really strong organic presence, just because you can't do any paid. Google has changed their targeting, so on the programmatic side of things, whereas in 2016, a lot of people were using Google and their programmatic offerings, DV360, because we can't target custom lists any longer. People are switching to other DSPs like The Trade Desk and others. And then Facebook as well has also put on some restrictions around targeting and around what we're able to run. Spotify is not allowing political, and neither are TikTok or Twitch. So when we're talking about reaching youth voters, where we know they're spending a ton of time on TikTok and Twitch, we have to get even more creative how to reach them because those platforms are just not accessible to us as political advertisers.
Is there a good example already from, say, how you're using TikTok to reach those younger voters?
So we can't reach them because political advertising is not available to us. Right. So we have to think about where else are they, the Instagrams, the Snapchats of the world, because TikTok is not allowing political.
How has allocation changed since the last 2 cycles in terms of where you're shifting and moving money? Have any of these changes actually also impacted where you're spending? Yeah,
so honestly, the biggest change this cycle has probably been because of COVID. So usually when you're thinking about offline, you're thinking about, direct mail, canvassing. Well, during a pandemic, you don't really want strangers showing up to your house to ask you questions about who you're voting for. So we've had to get a lot more creative with virtual events. Direct mail is actually something that we've seen as a really effective tool because we know people are home. We know people are opening their mail. So we've actually, across the industry have seen direct mail as something that's effective. And then because of people being home so often, TV has stayed steady. We haven't seen really a huge increase or a huge decrease, but we've seen a huge increase in CTV and streaming and digital. And so a lot of shift more so and more rapidly to the digital platforms.
As we moved from the primaries into the general election, of course, since all of these shifts have been happening very quickly, what are some of the surprises or the key learnings that you got from the primary season that you are now going to be implementing in the nationals?
I think this kind of goes across all of it. Media and targeting and everything we do as media buyers can only get us so far. What really, really matters is your creative messaging, your authenticity, building a narrative and a brand that people relate with, because the creative is really going to push you over the edge. And especially in times like this in COVID, the authenticity is something that we're really seeing resonate well. People they're a little suspicious when they see an overly produced spot, because they're like, well, how did this come to be in the middle of a pandemic? And so we're seeing some of the more authentic, genuine, shot on an iPhone, quick, down and dirty spots do better than what we maybe saw during the primary before COVID really hit, because we were able to get through Super Tuesday, which is March 3rd, before states started to shut down.
Mm-hmm. When you say do better, what are the key metrics for you at this point? Obviously, for every political campaigner tells me that the key metric is whether you won or lost in the end. But as you're thinking about optimization as you're going forward, what are some of the key metrics you're looking for to know that you're having an impact?
You know, because it is persuasion, there's difference. So for persuasion, which is more like awareness, you're really looking at reach, frequency, video completions, viewability. Are people actually watching my video? Are they muting it? Are they tabbing out? What effect is that having? Doing brand lift studies, those types of things. And then for GOTV, you are looking at who has actually voted, who is gone and put their ballot through, and what are those metrics, and that's more of a direct response or a direct to consumer campaign.
For a lot of people who aren't familiar with political media buying and campaigning, we should probably make clear that you guys work on a somewhat different playbook from the very start, in the sense of what data you're actually working from. Could you explain briefly what's different about the kind of data that you get to use as opposed to, say, most consumer brand marketers?
Yep, so we get access to something called the voter file, which basically across all of the different states, Republicans and Democrats both have access to this exact same data. It is everybody's sort of voting history and registration history from all of the different states for the past years. So we get access to understand who voted Republican, who voted Democrat, who voted Independent, which allows us to sort of build out models based on who we think may be a swing voter or a persuadable voter. So who are maybe those moderates that we want to speak with and that we want to target and talk to. That's not the only type of data that we utilize. We utilize a lot more, but that's a really big difference between what consumer brands and what political brands can utilize, because states do have regulations. Certain states do, not all, have regulations around large consumer brands utilizing the voter file to target based off of that information.
And I'm really curious about the ways in which especially Democratic candidates use micro-targeting. In fact, several years ago in this very spot, the Keynote during the summer Data and Programmatic Insider Summit, we had one of your counterparts, or last two of your counterparts from the Trump campaign, recounting proudly how they used Facebook micro-targeting to find specific voters and to use rapid fire dynamic content creation to target them with and test and target very specific messages. And I'm very curious, from the Democratic side, how do you look at that kind of use of the platforms, and what's your approach to using these kinds of this kind of targeting off of those sorts of voter files? What's different?
So actually lots changed from 2016 because of some of that really niche micro-targeting. Facebook, Google, they've taken some of that ability away to target that niche when you're targeting politically. So what worked in 2016 isn't necessarily something that we can actually even do in 2020. And so how we really view targeting is we view it as sort of a layered approach where, you know, you are talking to the voter file, but as many of us know, when we upload a custom list, we're going to lose half of those people because of match rate. We're going to lose them again because of find rate. And so you're losing a huge chunk of that list already. So the next thing we need to do is think about, okay, well, who are these people? What makes them tick? What are their habits? What other types of audiences and targeting can we build out based on that? And then also do another layer of that, which is more broad, to ensure that we're reaching all of the voters that we want to hit.
One of the challenges that political marketers have always had is that their technical ability to target online has often exceeded their ability to have content that actually speaks to that target. Tell me a little bit about the content operations that you've got now and how you're trying to satisfy the needs for, being able to target that precisely, but also needing a message that actually addresses that target.
Yeah, so I think two things. One, the creative operations across the industry are just amazing. They're pumping out hundreds of ads a day, just really incredible creative. And I think to be able to solve for that, you really need to build out your content and your targeting strategy far in advance. And so we've been thinking about this for a while. Who do we want to target? What kind of content will they be receiving? And you also need to be more open, because you are building so much content so quickly, to not always, to being okay with the audience not always buying your message. So if something's not working, pulling it down quickly, adjusting quickly, figuring out what a message that will work. And so to your point, in 2016, the Trump campaign was really good at sort of that rapid fire testing of just getting things out there and throwing a bunch of things at the wall and seeing what sticks. And so that can work really well, because you can do it really quickly on, say, at Facebook, or programmatically run it for a day or two, figure out what message works, and then try again. But just because we're doing that testing and something worked in a testing environment won't necessarily mean it's going to work when we're actually in the live environment. So we monitor all of those metrics on an hourly, daily basis to see what message is resonating, because unlike with consumer brands, we can actually have a backlash or a really negative effect if we're running a message that does not resonate with our audience. So we have to be really agile and able to pull that down quickly.
What's the key signal for that? When you're seeing a negative reaction, you know you've got to run away from it. What's telling you that?
So sometimes it'll be in the comments. You have to kind of sift through it, because Facebook has sort of become an area where everybody has an opinion. So you have to sift through what makes the most sense. But really, it's taking a look at, your engagements, your reach and your frequency, and seeing what is taking off, because some of these algorithms will push some of those better performing ones. But it's also looking at the sentiment, because if you're getting a ton of backlash in the comments, that's something that you're going to want to pull down.
And are you using dynamic content creation tools to do some of this as well, or is a lot of it manual? And have the micro-targeting policies, say at Facebook, changed the ways in which you have to do this?
Yeah, so definitely still using dynamic targeting or dynamic creative. It just helps cut down on the sheer volume of creative that is needed. But because of those changing because of the change in how we're allowed to target, we have had to sort of rethink what messages go where, and how can we speak more broadly to a wider range of voters instead of being so niche when you're talking to maybe a group of 1,000 in a state. That's just not really something that's feasible.
I'd like to break down what that digital channel looks like for you in terms of what its goals are. One of the arguments that I often hear from political marketers over digital is the question over whether digital media, especially social platforms, whether they really persuade or drive fundraising. Could you sort of walk us through some of the major channels and how you use each, how you see each as a mover of needles, different needles?
Yeah, so, I think we know, and we've known this, for a cycle or two now, and I think the political industry knows, and I think the consumer industry knows as well, video is really sort of our best medium to persuade. We know it works well, but we also know it's not just any type of video. It needs to be sort of that forced view, full episode player, really high impact. So connected TV, OTT space, we've seen it's been working really well for us. Mm-hmm. Across the industry. And then I think each platform and each unit kind of has its pros and cons. And instead of just looking at as like my overall, we also have to very specifically look at the platform. Like, what makes the most sense on Facebook? What is going to resonate the best on Facebook? What makes the most sense programmatically? What makes the most sense on connected TV? A lot have in the past maybe dismissed the power of digital to persuade. But with changing media habits, with COVID, with all of this stuff, I think people are starting to really lean more into digital and lean into its power to actually get a message across in a way that marketers have always thought TV was able to do.
There's been a lot of talk about how the Republicans are still doing door knocking, the Democrats are not. What is the digital equivalent of door knocking for you guys as you're thinking, especially about grassroots organizing and get out the vote campaigns? What can you do digitally to make up for that?
Yeah, so I think digitally you can do text campaigns, SMS. I think there's also phone calls, phone banking, that type of thing, as well as having more sort of one-on-one conversations. We've seen this from a lot of candidates where they're holding like mini town halls online. So it actually feels a lot more intimate than just having maybe a volunteer come over to your house, because you're actually able to talk to a candidate in a space that maybe you wouldn't have that kind of access to previously.
One of the controversial channels from the last congressional cycle was the particular use of mobile, especially for get out the vote. How are you using mobile this time as a channel to drive people to the polls?
Yeah, so again, I think it goes back to the people opting in, and when they opt in, you know, doing sort of text reminders, those types of things. There's still a lot of mobile creative and a lot of mobile campaigns that are going out there, but because this is a little bit different than 2018, where more people are at home, we've actually seen a rise across the industry in people utilizing desktop more. And so we're also leaning back into desktop as well, just meeting people where they happen to be.
I want to pull back. I want to signal to our audience that if you have questions, please raise your hand, and Lisa will get to you and activate you to ask a question. I wanted to pull back from this and talk and put your brand hat on. First of all, in terms of just buying up media, of course, most brands tell me don't launch a product in the last quarter of a presidential cycle, because you're going to pay through the nose to get through. At least in the poll that we ran, we're still not seeing a lot of media buyers who are feeling squeezed by political buying. Tell me a little bit about where you're buying up inventory, how difficult you think it's going to be for other marketers to break through in the next quarter.
Yeah, so I think we really see across just across the ecosystem, as we get closer and closer to election day, all of those places across the board, programmatic, CTV, social, TV, everything is kind of, you're going to see a squeeze, because, you know, towards the end, that's when everybody really wants to make sure that their messages are being heard. It will probably be a little bit different this year because of how many people are able to mail and vote. Mm-hmm. So a lot of that squeeze you'll probably start to see sooner, because a lot more people are going to be voting before November 3rd. And so a lot more money is going to be going into the ecosystem before November 3rd.
Is there enough, in terms of CTV, since you're mentioning it, that's such an important channel this time. In terms of buying up that inventory, is there more than we need in that channel, or are you buying it up fast? What does it look like?
Yeah, so I think all of the campaigns, Dem and Republican, have been really leaning in and buying up that inventory, reserving that inventory, ensuring that when we do get to those tight months in September and October, that we have that inventory ready to go. So you'll probably start to see a squeeze on all of that inventory, and you know, that video inventory moving forward.
Okay. I think we have some questions from the audience. Lisa?
Yes, we do. Scott Bender has a question for Erica. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, hey, Erica. Thank you for doing this. Just a question on, I guess, super PAC spending, and obviously they can't coordinate with the campaigns, but just curious in terms of, obviously we see much about them on TV, a little bit in CTV. I'm just curious in terms of their digital adoption and how a campaign, I guess, navigates around that, even from a digital standpoint.
Yeah, so there is no coordination across lines. So the super PACs have also leaned in heavily into digital as well. I also think in the political space, there's sort of this idea that if you're getting in late money from donors, the easiest, quickest place to put it is digitally. So a lot of late money goes into digital. just because that's a really easy place. You can get live fast, you know you can reach your voters, and you know you can be where they're online. And so a lot of late money tends to go towards digital, whether it's super PAC, candidate, just across the board.
Okay, we also have a question from Matthew Tagender. I believe I'm saying that correctly. And he wanted to know, who is Erica using for DCO?
Yeah, so I think it depends on, honestly, who the client feels most comfortable with. So we also do a lot of it internally and in-house. So we built that capability out on our side.
Okay, and Ashley also has a question for you.
Hello. I literally could probably talk to you all day long. But, you know, you talked a lot about direct mail as kind of being a key channel for this. Are you having any kind of synergies with that direct mail list and using that in LiveRamp and executing against that? And if so, are you running into any issues with like opt-ins with that?
Yeah, so with the direct mail list, it is something that's easy to utilize and then upload and then also target them online, which is really great, so that you've got sort of that offline and online, and you can have a more holistic view of what's happening, as well as create your own little echo chamber and make sure that people are seeing your message more than just once. So definitely that's something that we think about. And if there are any sort of opt-in issues, we're also looking at the voter file and comparing things against a voter file, which helps if we need to continue to reach people.
Erica, my wrap question is one that I always have for political marketers, especially people like you who have been on both sides. You've worked with consumer brands, you still do, but mainly focus on political campaigns. What do political marketers and media buyers know about leveraging digital that you think general consumer brands don't, or need to better understand and look at in political marketing? What can they get out of what you do that's different from what they're doing?
Yeah, I think for political marketers, we have to be incredibly agile and incredibly flexible, especially in real time. I think we are really great at, if your opponent says something, if they put an ad out, fact checking it in real time, getting ads out in real time. We can usually create an ad and get it out within a couple of hours. So I think really being flexible and agile and going quicker. I also think we're starting to come to a moment where we're seeing brands be kind of pushed into the social cause area because that's what consumers want. You know, I think if you know your audience well, like Nike did a really great job with that with Kaepernick a couple of years ago, but they knew that their audience and they knew that their consumers were going to really lean in when they leaned into Kaepernick, and they saw a huge increase in sales. But more and more consumers are wanting to have their brands kind of take a stand on social causes and be more vocal about it. And so understanding, I think, the data and who your audience is and who your consumer is, to understand if you can actually do that, is really important. And then being willing to do like quick down and dirty tests. We don't have the ability to do a 6-month-long test because the campaign is literally done in 2 months. So we have to be able to do a test in a couple of days and take those learnings as directional and say, okay, this is directional. This is what we're going to take from this. This is the messaging we're going to take. We're going to put it out there. And if it doesn't work, we'll pull it back down and we'll try something else.
That's interesting. It's fascinating because really in many ways what we're seeing is that the twin challenges of this year, both the COVID crisis as well as social unrest and social justice, have both pushed brands towards having to become more like political marketers. They need to research quickly, turn around creative quickly, and start thinking in broader social causes and then understanding who their audience is.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing. And we're actually seeing, you know, your REIs of the world, Patagonia's, Ben & Jerry, all of them have started to really wade into this space, and they've actually seen great success with it. And great success with taking some of the lessons learned from, say, a political campaign to this. And a lot of people who work on political campaigns usually get snatched up after the presidentials and go to consumer brands, because brands do want to be able to be more agile and be able to utilize some of the things that we're able to do on a campaign.
Erica Monteith of GMMB, thank you so much for leading us off. We'll check back with you soon to find out exactly how this all worked out, but I think we're all going to find out soon enough. Thanks, Erica.
Thank you so much. It was nice.
Bye, Erica.